What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing another video. Today I'm bringing a video on Power Rangers Hyperforce episode 22. This episode overall was really an interesting episode. It was not necessarily one of the strongest episodes, but it had a pretty insane ending. And by that I mean it's one that you will definitely cry and freak out over. I mean, as far as episodes go, this definitely was the one that people will be talking about this whole entire week. And I really mean that because, oh my god, the way that this episode ends is just insane. Now, as far as things go, and again, I'm not going to give you guys spoilers for those of you that are maybe coming into this and haven't seen the actual episode yet. As far as things go, many of you that are freaking out, especially those that are coming into this off of actually watching this, please understand, it may seem like a holy moly, like what's going to happen now? How is this going? Like, what are they going to do from here? Understand this now. The situation isn't as bad. They just received an item that's super important that will allow things to turn back the clock and things will work out. Although this definitely is a big shocker right now, and I'm sure people understand that if you watch this episode, you will understand what I mean. It was such an insane moment, and believe me, when I first saw what happened at the end, I literally was ready to burst into tears crying, because it was just such an emotional, like, freak out moment, and everyone online was losing their minds over this stuff, because holy moly, that moment was just insane, and I'm not going to give you guys any more than that. For those that want to know more, stay tuned till the end of the video, or watch it, and that's obviously the bigger priority. Please watch it, guys. If you haven't watched it yet, do so, because you will definitely want to know what happens there. And again, as I said before, don't freak out, but understand things are not as final as you think they are with what happens there. And I'll explain that later on in this video. So let's move on past that point. I could go on and on about that a million times over, and there's really no point in that until we get to that actual point in the actual episode. So let's just say this much right now. The episode overall, again, I said before, was alright. The episode starts off with us actually seeing that we are still with the Senso Knight. We also find out that Chloe, or Megan, depending on how you know her. Megan, she plays Chloe in Power Rangers Hyperforce, but in this episode she was not there because she had a family emergency. So that means that we've had 3 Hyperforce Rangers miss an episode. Which ones? Vesper, Marv, and Chloe. Yes, so no episode has happened so far. Well, actually, it's not true. What am I saying? Vesper, Marv, and Chloe, and also Jack, so 4. Yeah, because Jack missed one too. Yeah, so every Hyperforce Ranger has pretty much missed one, I believe, except for Jack. No, not Jack, except for Eddie. Which is interesting also because he's like the only one that he shows up to every single episode. And also, he's the one Hyperforce Ranger that pretty much almost every single time does the fireside chats. So that's kind of important. Again, he's a big fan, and you know, he's someone that just is a very easygoing guy that will always do these kind of things. So I kind of appreciate the fact that he's so dedicated to all elements of the show, and that's a big thumbs up to him. Great job, Andre. I really think that that's an awesome thing that you really do, and it shows that you're dedicated to the fans and not just being involved in the show. Does that mean that the other Hyperforce Rangers are bad or they're not as dedicated? No, but I do think that it shows on his part that he's someone that's so committed to it in every way possible that he's always willing to be engaged in all elements of the Hyperforce show and really showing his love for it all. Again, he's a huge super fan, and that's a great thing, so just keep that in mind. But anyway, moving on, less talking about the actual Hyperforce Rangers, let's talk about the episode itself. The episode itself was very interesting, as I said before. This does take place with the Sentinel Knight still being in it, so that is interesting. We do get to see some villains that are ones that are new. Well, not necessarily new, but new to this show. Ones that actually, a lot of them are ones that we've actually seen before in other Power Rangers series. and also ones from the past from Power Rangers Hyperforce. Yes, so those two things do happen this episode, but let's keep going with it. What we do end up seeing is that the Hyperforce Rangers do end up traveling back to the Earth of the year 2007. We also see that in the meantime, Joe is dancing with Nadira, as we saw in the previous episode, and at the same time, we have different discussions occurring, whether it be with Eddie and Vesper talking about different things that have happened to them and how crazy things have gotten, and then having Rito involved, and then on top of that, having Marv wanting to gain certain strength and knowledge from the Sentinel Knight, and we also have it where Vesper wants to hold the Corona Aurora, the item that they got in the previous episode, which for those who do not remember, that device can be used to bring someone back to life, which is very, very important. So anyway, moving on from there, what we end up seeing is that as the Rangers have different discussions, several different things happen, and Sentinel Knight does offer to train Marv in some ways. There's a few things that are brought up at certain points with the Sentinel Knight that don't actually get fully explained, but overall it's pretty interesting. Anyway, from here, the Rangers do end up managing to gain the ability to create a hologram of the Corona Aurora, which is very important. It's only a visual copy, so that means that they don't have any of the powers of it, but they can still create the image of it if they wanted to, because of Vesper's abilities. So that's very important. We do see in a separate scene that the Alliance Leader calls a meeting and has many villains together with him, and he tells his followers that they need to get the Corona Aurora. It's very important to them. We don't know the exact reasoning for that, but it is an interesting thing, and it actually makes a lot more sense in the end as to what really does end up happening with it. So anyway, what happens from here is that one villain has the ability to revive characters, so that's kind of interesting as well, because you have a character that's able to revive characters, and yet you have a device that's going to be able to revive characters as well. So it's sort of why would you need to have both if you already have one or something? They kind of explain that whole thing with him being the square-shaped body person that has this ability. Kind of weird. Anyway, what does end up happening is that from here, Alpha announces that the Rangers have arrived in the year 2007 on Earth. They head over towards where the stream is, leading up to the waterfall where they met the Sentinel Knight initially. What does end up happening is that the Hyperforce Rangers are thanked by the Sentinel Knight. They end up gaining full health for those that are damaged, which only one of them was damaged. It was Joe, so keep that in mind. But they also gain energy, which is always good because energy allows them to morph and use the Megazord and all that, and use their Zords, so that's very important. What can I say otherwise? Marv and the Sentinel Knight do fight. The Sentinel Knight uses his Excelsior blade, and at the same time Marv uses his Iapetos claws against the Sentinel Knight's sword, and they get to kind of train and practice against each other. Initially, it's kind of brought up that they were going to have each Ranger spar against the Sentinel Knight, but in this case, only Marv gets to spar, so it really doesn't go anywhere past that point. But what does end up happening is that eventually, Sentinel Knight is impressed by Marv's skills, and then we end up seeing the Doomstone monster, which is from the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers first season. He was a monster that we did end up seeing during one of the Halloween episodes, I believe. During the Halloween episode, I believe it was. It was a monster that basically was able to revive previously existing monsters. We don't know the exact details as to the whole situation here, but let's just say this much right now. He manages to revive a monster that was in Hyperforce and a monster that was not, which is part of the reason why I'm a little bit confused in a way as to why that happened, because he revives Shiburai, which is one that we did end up seeing in Power Rangers Hyperforce, but then he also revives Beevil, which is not from Power Rangers Hyperforce at all. I believe he's from Power Rangers in Space. So it's sort of a weird situation, because it's why would you have them from two completely separate things, and yet they never even interacted with Beevil at all? You know what I mean? How does that make much sense? Again, we don't know the whole situation, and of course this is kind of its own continuity, so like things like this can happen, but you would think when you're kind of focused around a certain season, you would use the villains that already existed in the show. Like if, let's just say, Primitor was revived, that would make more sense just because he was actually in Hyperforce. But at the same time, it is good that they are changing it up with someone that maybe wasn't seen as much in Power Rangers Hyperforce, and is another villain that's an older villain that we know from the Power Rangers franchise, and is someone that's a new face. And I actually appreciate that a lot, because the fact that we have two monsters in this episode that are completely original, Doomstone and Beevil, ones that were in Power Rangers series but haven't been in Hyperforce yet. Very cool thing to see. I actually really think that's a great thing that they introduced into this. Nice to see that they're adding more and more monsters, even ones not just from Mighty Morphin, because Beevil, again, as I said before, is not from Mighty Morphin, I believe. So that's very important to remember. I believe I'm right. It's in space. So very cool. What else can I say? After these two are revived, we end up seeing several different fight sequences. The Rangers fight Beevil and also Doomstone. Several different attacks occur from the different Hyperforce Rangers. I forgot to also mention during this episode, Chloe, though she was not there physically, Malika played Chloe as an NPC this episode. So what that basically means is that like she was still involved, like her character. It's just that she wasn't necessarily involved as like it wasn't her physically. So like certain things that she might do based on who she is as a person, and like certain things that she would say, you know, obviously there's limitations to what Malika knows, but Malika did her best. You know, she wasn't looking to copy her or do anything that was too out of character for her, but at the same time she wasn't going to be doing like the whole burrito bit, which I actually appreciate that, no offense. Not that I'm against what Megan does with her burrito bit, but I think that it definitely gets a bit much over time because she has too much emphasis on that. So it's kind of nice to see her Malika playing this character where she's not focusing on the burrito stuff as much and really just focusing on, you know, doing her job as a ranger and taking the role seriously and still having some Chloe personality to her, but again, as I said before, not focusing on the kind of silly stuff that she sometimes does. Again, not saying it's bad always, but I think that there's definitely a little bit too much consistency with that. And it's nice to see her taking the role a more serious route, which fits with who Malika is. And I understand Malika's playing another character, but I think that it was good. She did a perfectly fine job. It's not Chloe, but it's not supposed to be 100% her. You know, it's their interpretation. It's Malika's way of portraying her character, and you know, you do what you have to do. So keep it in mind if you are anyone that's thinking, oh, I was so upset about Chloe not being here. Malika did do stuff this episode. She may not have been the exact carbon copy of Chloe, but she did do some good stuff, and I think that it was nice to see a change. Even if it was just for this one episode, keep it in mind. I have nothing against Chloe. It's just, it was nice to see this kind of alteration even for one time. Moving on from there, though, the Rangers continue to fight. Several different attacks happen. We have different group team attacks that occur, whether it be with Joe and Jack. We have team attacks with Vesper and... I'm trying to think now. Vesper and Eddie have a team attack, and also Vesper and I think Chloe has a team attack. You know, there's several different attacks that occur. Eventually, the monsters are turned big. We also see that, you might remember the Cerberus disc in the previous episode. The Cerberus disc was given to Alpha 55 to be repaired. Well, when Vesper ends up using it, and I forgot to mention this also, Vesper actually gets access to the Sentinel Knights. She actually gets the ability to become a Sentinel Ranger, meaning that she actually gains a Battleizer. Yes, very important. Again, there's a lot of things that happen in this episode, so it's sort of like I'm overwhelmed by what happened at the end, so it's sort of like it's hard to focus on other big things that happened this episode when the ending was so powerful. But let's just say this much right now. Yes, she gains a battleizer. So yes, both female Hyperforce Rangers have battleizers now. We have the Pink Rangers one, which is based off of, the Middle Ages, and then we have Vesper's one, which is based off of the Sentinel Knight armor kind of situation. So it's very different, very contrasting with purpose and everything like that. We really don't know all the details of Vesper's armor, and it was only just introduced, so keep that in mind. There's more to that, but anyway, I keep on hinting. What does end up happening is that from here, we end up seeing that the monsters do end up growing. The Rangers get to use their weapons against Bevo and also Shiburai, and it's kind of interesting that they really focus a lot more on their weapons than actually on just summoning their Zords. Like, they actually spend a decent amount of time when it's sort of like, why couldn't they have just summoned their Zords a little bit? Like, it just seems weird to me at times. But, I mean, they did what they had to do, and when it made sense, they did summon their Zords, which was good. At the same time, what we also see is that the Sentinel Knight is missing. Joe actually goes after the Sentinel Knight, and what actually happens is that the Sentinel Knight tries to run off into the forest and is met by Valkynos, because Valkynos is told by the Alliance leader to go down there and get the Chrono Aurora, or he'll be removed from the Alliance and kicked out and just won't be seen as good. And so what ends up happening is that Valkynos does end up dealing with, the Sentinel Knight. In the meantime, Joe does help out. There are putties that are summoned as well. In the meantime, the Rangers continue to fight, and several different attacks occur. Eventually, they do manage to finish Bevo, not super quickly, but is much quicker than, say, Shiburai was, and that's very important. The Rangers do eventually manage to defeat Shiburai, which is very cool. And what does end up happening is that Shiburai actually shrinks down to like regular human kind of monster size and goes to look for the Alliance leader at that point. In the meantime, we also see that the Alliance leader and Valkynos are both on Earth, and they're dealing with the Sentinel Knight, which what actually ends up happening is that Valkynos does end up stealing the Chrono Aurora at one point from the Sentinel Knight. The Sentinel Knight also gets very, very badly damaged to the point that he practically is like non-existent, like where he's basically barely living and he's just purely meant as a shield for Vesper because he wants to protect her and he wants to protect the Rangers and everything, and that's very important. What we also end up seeing is that when the Alliance leader joins the scene, he mentions the fact that he knows the Sentinel Knight, and the Sentinel Knight should know him. So it's very unclear as to what that really means. Like, how would he know him? And it's also not clear based on the Sentinel Knight, because the Sentinel Knight doesn't actually say who he is. So we still don't know who the Alliance leader is, but for some reason the two of them know each other. Now, for those that are thinking, does that mean that this character is someone from Power Rangers Operation Overdrive? So the thing is that is a possibility. People do think that is a great possibility. People are actually suspecting that Thrax might be it. I'm not convinced. I could see it possibly. I don't know why they would need to necessarily do that, but you never know. It could also be someone from another time period entirely different. You have to keep in mind something. Sentinel Knight knows of Rangers of the past and the future, and so for all we know, he could have traveled through time and had met Rangers from different time periods. It's just that we don't know the whole situation here. And again, this is an original story, Power Rangers Hyperforce. So if you're thinking that, based on what we knew in Power Rangers Operation Overdrive, that you can't assume that he would have contacted other eras. It's its own continuity. In the previous episode, they basically implied that he's known about Rangers from different time periods. He's known about the Hyperforce Rangers. He may not have met them, but he knows of them, and he knows of their names and everything like that. So for all we know, he may have had a battle, whether it be years and years and years in the past, or he may have had a battle somehow in the future where a team brought him into the future, but we don't know the whole situation yet. Of course, we'll have to wait and see what is told to us. Maybe nothing is told to us, but at the same time, it does bring up the question of, how are they connected? How is there some sort of connection between the Sentinel Knight and the Alliance Leader? And of course, we'll have to wait and see when the identity is revealed to us exactly as to who the Alliance Leader is. So all this does end up happening. What does occur eventually when Shiburai is defeated to the point that he is turned to his normal human size, he goes into the forest, he finds the Alliance Leader. The Alliance Leader is upset at Shiburai for retreating and everything, and manages to take all the dark energy out of Shiburai and destroys him. So that's pretty interesting. He basically destroys his own villain that he summoned to attack the Rangers, and that's a pretty interesting development that occurs. At the same time, we also see it where Vesper tries to use a hologram to pretend to have the real Corona Roar. But what does end up happening is that eventually, as Valkanos travels through the forest trying to get to Vesper, the Alliance Leader also follows. And when they try to present the Corona Roar to each other, what ends up happening is that when the Alliance Leader tries to grab it, it turns into, it's a hologram, so he can't actually grab it. So his hand just goes right through it. So what we do end up seeing is that from there they realize, it's a fake. Vesper ends up being attacked by the Alliance Leader, and in the meantime, what we end up seeing is the Sentinel Knight tries to defend. Several different attacks occur. We also see the different Rangers using different weapons. This episode also had the Hyperforce Megazord used. I forgot to mention it. Small detail, but it was nice to see. We actually got to see Jack being the heart of the Megazord. Again, the order of this episode was a little bit everywhere for me. Not that the episode itself was everywhere, but just because of the fact that, you have to remember, I am so focused on that end that it's just sort of like everyone is, I'm sure, thinking that way. It's like that ending is just so big. But yes, the Hyperforce Megazord was used. Jack got to be the heart, which is the first time that's happened. The Krius Cannon was also used in this episode, which was the first time since very, very, very early in Power Rangers Hyperforce. I think since they actually gained those items, those weapons themselves, have they really used the Krius Cannon. That's very interesting, and yes, Jack got a lot of focus this episode, but I definitely think it was an interesting way that they did things. Anyway, several different things occur. At one point, Eddie and Vesper finally do a very important exchange. And yes, I'm getting to the ending here, because this episode, though it did have a lot of stuff going on in it, a lot of it was just fighting. It wasn't big on story, and that's what's been happening for a lot of these episodes. So if you're thinking maybe this video seems shorter, it's not because it actually is a shorter episode. It's actually a fairly long episode overall, but it's more so the fact that this episode had so much fighting that the story was kind of put on the back burner in a lot of cases, where there's less to really talk about on that end of things. Doesn't mean that the story was not strong this episode. Oh, absolutely not. The story was huge, but it wasn't necessarily the biggest element of it compared to past episodes, even if you go back to last episode. But anyway, what does end up happening is that Eddie does something pretty amazing where he finally says that he loves Vesper. Yes, he straight up says it. He communicates to her using his communicator, which is very, very cool. He uses his morpher, and what does end up happening is that Eddie decides to do something which he never is really supposed to do as a Ranger, because of the fact that as a Ranger you're not supposed to do anything excessive in battle, and he actually decides to use his Zord to basically try to crush the Alliance Leader, because the Alliance Leader is trying to attack Vesper, and he loves Vesper, and he literally says, "I love you, Vesper," pretty much, and he goes at her. He goes at the Alliance Leader trying to attack her, and eventually, well, what does end up happening is the Alliance Leader barely gets hurt, but something very, very serious does end up happening to Vesper, which is caused by the Alliance Leader, where the Alliance Leader manages to pretty much destroy Vesper. And by that I mean, yes, completely destroyed. So yes, she is dead. Yeah. How do I put this? I was definitely crying when that moment happened, and literally everyone was losing their minds when this happened. Yes, Vesper dies at the end of this episode. Now, for those that are thinking to themselves, holy moly, how did this happen, right? Keep this in mind. Keep this in mind. They have the Chrono Aurora at the end of the episode. Yes, Marv manages to get the Chrono Aurora. They managed to get it back. Good stuff there. So it's not completely the end of the world, because in reality, because they have the Chrono Aurora, that allows them to actually bring back those that are dead. So in other words, they can go and bring back Vesper and she'll be back to living again. Now, of course, she is an android, and that is another element to her, but it really shouldn't impede on her being revived. I think that should be no problem at all, and that will just mean that she'll just come back. As far as things go, it might be the situation where they can only choose one, and what ends up happening is that like they have to choose between the Sentinel Knight and Vesper, and they end up deciding Vesper. That is a possibility that I could definitely see happening, because again, the Sentinel Knight is in a very weakened state. He's not dead, but he's definitely at like his last legs, where he's pretty much like at that extremely vulnerable point where like he could die, but you know, at this moment he's still holding strong, but not in perfect sustainable shape to really last much past this fight. So keep that in mind if you're wondering where this will go from here. Vesper, yes, she could definitely be revived. There's no question there. But we'll have to wait and see for sure what they do end up doing. I don't think that she's like going to be done, like completely done. I think that this is definitely just going to be one of those situations where they're kind of going to go, if you've ever watched Dragon Ball or Dragon Ball Z, we have like the 7 Dragon Balls or whatever, and then they end up getting Shenron or whatever, and he brings characters back to life. Like I think that's what's basically going to happen here, where the Chrono Aurora is going to be used, and suddenly Vesper's gonna be revived, and things will be good again, and it will be like this sweet, touching moment where everyone will just be like, "Yes, she's alive," and people will just freak out and be so happy to know that the character that they wanted to be alive is alive. And personally, I love Vesper as a character. I think that she's definitely a very, very strong character. I think a lot of the Hyperforce Rangers are really, really good. So keep it in mind if you're freaking out and losing your minds and thinking to yourself, how is this possible? How is this going to work? What are they going to do now? How can this even be possible? Why would they do this? Understand it's likely not permanent. It's likely happening now, and then she'll be revived in the next episode because of the Chrono Aurora being in their hands. Very, very important, and I want everyone to remember that. So for all of you that are going to be freaking out for the next couple of days or even tomorrow or whatever, keep this in mind. It is not a permanent thing. Most likely, next episode, the Chrono Aurora will solve that issue. So that is very important to remember. I would love to know your guys' opinions. What did you guys think of this episode? How do you think the Sentinel Knight actually knows of the Alliance Leader? Why do you think he would know him? Who do you think the Alliance Leader could be now that we know that there's someone that actually knows the Alliance Leader? Again, the Sentinel Knight did not acknowledge the Alliance Leader when he mentioned this, but who do you think it could be? You know, is it someone from Operation Overdrive, or is it someone from a completely different season that maybe the Sentinel Knight somehow managed to interact with at one point? Again, he is someone that's been around for centuries, so there's no reason why it couldn't have been a villain from years prior. Yeah, keep it in mind. So please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I will see you guys in the next video, and I hope you guys enjoy this episode. So until then, guys, I am Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.